whispers beneath the mushroom caps. Balin huffed as he straightened his back, the weight of years pressing on his broad shoulders. The cobblestone path that stretched out before him shimmered under the soft light filtering through the massive mushroom caps. The village of Thistlewood, nestled deep within the enchanted forest, had been his home for more years than he cared to count. Each mushroom house, with its red and white speckled roof, held stories of generations past, whispered through the creaking of wooden doors and the rustling of ivy-clad walls. Another day, another walk, Balin muttered to himself, the gravelly tone of his voice echoing the crunch of moss under his boots. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wild flowers, an aroma that was both comforting and foreboding, as if the forest itself breathed alongside its inhabitants. As he passed by the familiar round doors, the faint sound of children's laughter drifted towards him. "Morning, Master Balin," called a young dwarf boy, his face peeking out from behind a mushroom stem as white as a tree trunk. "Morning, lad," Balin replied with a smile, tipping his tattered cap. The boy darted back into the shadows, off to join his friends in a game of hide and seek. They were the lifeblood of Thistlewood, the next generation that would carry on the traditions of their ancestors. Balin's heart warmed at the thought, though it was tinged with the sorrow of one who had seen too many years slip by. His path took him past the Elders' Circle, where a group of white-bearded dwarfs sat around a fire, their voices low as they spoke of days long gone. The flames crackled and popped, sending tiny embers dancing into the air like fireflies. Balin paused to listen, catching snippets of conversation about old wars and ancient treasures. "It's been nearly 50 years since the last of the great hunts," one elder remarked, his voice trembling with age. Another chimed in, "and it's said that the old magic is fading from these woods. We've not seen the likes of it in generations." Balin's ears perked up at the mention of the great hunts. He had been but a lad when they last took place, though the tales of those who had ventured into the depths of the forest had always fascinated him. The hunts were legendary, a rite of passage for the bravest and most skilled dwarfs of the village. They spoke of encounters with mythical creatures, the unearthing of forgotten relics, and the pursuit of secrets buried deep within the earth. Lost in thought, Balin barely noticed as the path led him to the edge of the village. Here, the cobblestones gave way to a dense carpet of moss, the trees looming taller and more twisted. The air grew cooler, the sunlight dimming as it struggled to penetrate the thick canopy above. It was a place both beautiful and eerie, where the boundaries between the natural world and the mystical blurred. Balin, a soft voice called from behind him, breaking the stillness. He turned to see Anwen, the village healer, standing a few paces away. Her dark hair fell in waves down her back, and her eyes, the color of deep emerald, held a knowing look. Anwen, Balin greeted her with a nod. "What brings you out here?" "I could ask you the same," she replied with a slight smile. "The forest has been restless lately. The animals are uneasy, and the winds carry whispers of something old." Balin frowned, his thick brows knitting together. "Old? What do you mean?" Anwen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "There have been signs, Balin. Strange symbols carved into the trees, shadows moving where there should be none. The elders speak of it in hushed tones, but they're worried. They believe something ancient has awakened." A chill ran down Balin's spine at her words. He had felt it too, though he hadn't wanted to admit it. The forest, which had always been a place of solace for him, had taken on a darker, more foreboding aura in recent days. "What do you think it is?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. Anwen shook her head. "I don't know. But I've seen the signs before, in the old texts passed down by my grandmother. She spoke of a time when the forest was alive with magic, both light and dark. The balance between them has always been delicate, and when it shifts, she trailed off, her gaze distant. When it shifts, something bad happens, Balin finished for her. His mind raced with thoughts of the old stories, the ones his father had told him when he was just a boy. Tales of a great darkness that had once threatened their world, kept at bay only by the ancient magic of the forest. Magic that was now fading. "We need to warn the village," Anwen said urgently. "The elders must know, and we should prepare. If the old magic is returning, we don't know what might come with it." Balin nodded, a sense of duty settling over him. He was no longer the young dwarf who had dreamed of adventure, but he had a responsibility to his people, to protect them as his ancestors had done before him. Together, they made their way back to the heart of Thistlewood, where the village bustled with activity. As they approached the elders' circle, the group of dwarfs looked up, their conversations halting as they saw the serious expressions on Balin and Anwen's faces. "Elders," Balin began, his voice steady but firm, "we have reason to believe that something ancient is stirring in the forest. Anwen has seen the signs, and I trust her judgment. We need to prepare, and we need to understand what we're dealing with." The elders exchanged worried glances, their faces etched with lines of age and concern. "What signs?" one of them asked, his voice gruff. "Symbols carved into the trees, shadows that move without light, and the animals, they're uneasy," Anwen explained. "The old magic is returning, but it's not just the light. The darkness comes with it." A heavy silence fell over the group as they processed her words. Finally, the eldest among them, a dwarf with a beard so long it nearly touched the ground, spoke up. "The balance of the forest has always been maintained by the old magic," he said slowly. "If that balance is shifting, it could mean that the ancient forces are awakening. Forces that have lain dormant for centuries. What do we do?" Balin asked, his voice tinged with urgency. The elder sighed deeply. "We must seek out the source of this disturbance. If the darkness is returning, we need to confront it before it spreads. But we cannot do this alone. We will need the help of the entire village, and perhaps, we will need to call upon allies from beyond our borders." Balin's heart skipped a beat at the thought. The dwarfs of Thistlewood had always been a solitary folk, rarely venturing beyond the boundaries of their village. To seek help from outsiders was unheard of, but the gravity of the situation was clear. "Who will go?" Anwen asked, her gaze shifting between the elders and Balin. "I will," Balin said without hesitation. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but he knew he couldn't let fear hold him back. "I will find out what's causing this and put an end to it, whatever it takes." The elder nodded solemnly. "Very well, Balin. You will not go alone. Choose a few of our bravest and most skilled to accompany you. This will be a dangerous journey, but you have our trust and our blessings." Anwen placed a hand on Balin's arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "I'll go with you," she said softly. "You'll need someone who understands the magic of the forest, and I can help interpret the signs we might encounter." Balin looked into her eyes, seeing the determination there. He knew she was right, they would need all the help they could get. "Thank you, Anwen," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. The elders began to make preparations, calling upon the villagers to gather supplies and ready themselves for whatever might come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in a warm golden glow, the air was thick with anticipation and unease. Balin spent the night in restless sleep, his dreams filled with images of dark shadows creeping through the forest, of ancient symbols glowing with an eerie light. He awoke before dawn, the weight of the coming journey heavy on his mind. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick canopy, Balin stood at the edge of the village, a small group of dwarfs gathered around him. Anwen was by his side, her face calm but resolute. Along with them were three others: Thorin, a burly dwarf known for his strength and skill with an axe; Dane, a sharp-eyed scout with a knack for finding hidden paths; and Ori, a young dwarf eager to prove himself, his face alight with the thrill of adventure. "Are we ready?" Balin asked, his gaze sweeping over the group. "As ready as we'll ever be," Thorin grunted, hefting his axe onto his shoulder. The others nodded in agreement, their expressions serious but determined. "Let's go then," Balin said, his voice filled with resolve. He turned and led the way into the forest, the towering trees closing in around them as they ventured into the unknown. The journey was slow and arduous, the forest growing denser and darker the deeper they went. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the sounds of the village quickly faded into silence. The only noise was the soft crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of something unseen in the underbrush. "Stay alert," Balin whispered, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. The others followed closely behind, their senses heightened, every movement a potential threat. Hours passed as they trekked through the forest, the daylight fading into a dim twilight as the thick canopy overhead blocked out the sun. The trees here were ancient, their gnarled roots twisting and curling through the ground like serpents. Strange symbols were carved into the bark, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. "This way," Dane murmured, gesturing towards a narrow path that wound its way deeper into the forest. His sharp eyes had caught sight of something glinting in the distance, and the group followed him cautiously. As they rounded a bend, the forest opened up into a small clearing, the air suddenly growing colder. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone altar, covered in moss and vines. The symbols on the altar matched those carved into the trees, their glow pulsing softly like a heartbeat. "What is this place?" Ori whispered, his voice tinged with awe and fear. "It's old magic," Anwen replied, her voice barely audible. "This altar, it's a focal point for the magic in the forest. But something's wrong. The balance is off." Balin stepped closer to the altar, his hand hovering over the symbols. He could feel the power emanating from it, but it was tainted, corrupted by something dark. "Can we fix it?" he asked, his voice tight with tension. Anwen shook her head, her expression troubled. "I don't know. This magic is ancient, older than anything we've encountered before. If it's been disturbed, it might be beyond our ability to restore." Before Balin could respond, a low growl echoed through the clearing, sending a shiver down his spine. The group tensed, their weapons drawn as they scanned the trees for the source of the noise. "Show yourself!" Thorin bellowed, his axe at the ready. For a moment, there was only silence, the air thick with anticipation. Then, from the shadows, a pair of glowing eyes emerged, followed by a massive, hulking figure. It was a creature of nightmare, its body covered in dark, matted fur, and its fangs glistening with saliva. "A shadow beast," Anwen gasped, her eyes widening in fear. The creature let out a deafening roar, its claws digging into the earth as it lunged towards them. Balin barely had time to react, throwing himself to the side as the beast's massive paw swiped through the air where he had just stood. "Fight!" he shouted, scrambling to his feet as the others engaged the creature. Thorin swung his axe with all his might, the blade biting into the beast's thick hide, but it barely seemed to notice. Dane loosed arrows from his bow, each one finding its mark, but the creature was relentless. "And when the altar," Balin called out, realizing that they couldn't defeat the beast through sheer force alone. "There's got to be something we can do to stop it." Anwen's eyes darted to the altar, her mind racing as she tried to recall the old texts she had studied. "There's a binding spell," she murmured, "but it requires a sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Balin asked, dodging another swipe from the creature's claws. "A life," Anwen said grimly, her face pale. "The magic requires a life to bind the darkness." Balin's heart clenched at her words. "No," he said firmly. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way," Anwen cried, her voice desperate. "This is the only way to stop it." Before Balin could protest, Ori stepped forward, determination written across his young face. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "No, Ori, you're too young," Balin said, grabbing the boy's arm. "You have your whole life ahead of you." Ori shook his head, pulling free from Balin's grasp. "This is my choice," he said softly. "If it means saving the village, saving everyone, then it's worth it." Anwen's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, her hands trembling as she began to chant the binding spell. Ori approached the altar, his heart pounding in his chest but his resolve unwavering. As the spell took hold, the symbols on the altar flared to life, their light growing brighter and brighter until it filled the clearing. The shadow beast roared in fury, its body writhing as the magic began to bind it, pulling it towards the altar. "Ori!" Balin shouted, his voice filled with anguish as he reached out towards the boy. But it was too late. The magic consumed Ori, his body dissolving into light as the spell completed. The shadow beast let out one final, agonized howl before it too was pulled into the altar, the dark energy dissipating into the air. And then, there was silence. Balin fell to his knees, his heart heavy with grief. Anwen collapsed beside him, her sobs shaking her slender frame. The others stood in stunned silence, their weapons hanging limply by their sides. The forest was still, the balance restored, but at a terrible cost. Balin looked up at the altar, its light now dim, the symbols fading back into the stone. Ori's sacrifice had saved them all, but the pain of his loss was a wound that would never fully heal. "We need to go back," Anwen said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "The village needs to know what happened." Balin nodded, his throat tight. He rose to his feet, his body aching with exhaustion and sorrow. Together, they began the long walk back to Thistlewood, the weight of their journey heavy on their shoulders. As they reached the village, the elders and villagers gathered around, their faces filled with worry and curiosity. Balin took a deep breath, knowing that the news he carried would bring both relief and heartbreak. "We've stopped the darkness," he began, his voice steady despite the pain. "But Ori, he sacrificed himself to save us all." A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by hushed whispers and tears. The villagers mourned the loss of the young dwarf, but they also honored his bravery and the gift he had given them all. Days passed, and life in Thistlewood slowly returned to normal. The shadow of the darkness had lifted, but the memory of Ori's sacrifice remained, etched into the hearts of the villagers. Balin often found himself standing at the edge of the forest, staring into the trees and wondering about the balance between light and dark, and the cost of maintaining it. And though the forest was once again a place of beauty and wonder, there was a new respect among the villagers for the old magic, and for the sacrifices made to protect it. For in the heart of the forest, beneath the mushroom caps, the whispers of the ancient magic continued to echo. A reminder that some things are worth fighting for, even at the greatest of costs.